the Cartography of Coherence. It is possible to be surrounded by information and yet utterly lost. A man may possess 1,000 facts and still have no idea what they mean. He may know what something is, and even how to use it, but not whether he ought to. This is the condition we find ourselves in. The shelves are full. The signs are still visible. But the landmarks that gave them meaning have grown dim. People are not panicking. They are drifting. Not because there is no path forward, but because no one is quite sure where they are. It is not confusion of motion. It is confusion of direction. What has been lost is not data, but orientation. And orientation is what culture once gave us. Culture, in its true form, does not tell you what to believe. It does not govern your thoughts like a doctrine, nor command your actions like a law. Rather, it shapes the world around you so that certain things simply make sense. A gesture carries weight. A word has honor. A silence means something. You may not know why you bow your head at the grave, but something in you insists that you must. This kind of knowledge is not acquired by study. It is absorbed. You are born into it, like a child born into a language. It comes not with explanation, but with repetition. And once it is in you, it does not feel like a rule at all. It feels like the way things are. This is what I mean when I say that culture is a map, not a printed diagram, but a field of unseen lines and understood directions. It helps you tell north from south before you have ever heard of a compass. It teaches you how to walk through life without bumping into everything. And when it is gone, you feel it. Not immediately, perhaps, but eventually. Things grow less solid. You are free to choose, yes, but you no longer know what the choices are for. This book is not about defining culture. To define it would be to flatten it. Culture is not the sum of our customs, nor a list of beliefs. It is the pattern of meaning beneath those things. The argument of this chapter is simple. We once had a way of knowing where we were, and now we do not. When the map fades, you do not collapse. You hesitate, then you wander, then you forget that you ever knew where you were meant to be. And all the while, something in you grows anxious, not because you are being pushed, but because you have lost the lines by which you once stayed upright. What follows is not a theory, but a kind of recollection. I am not trying to show you a system, but a shape, a memory of coherence. If it works, it will remind you, not of something you were told, but of something you once knew. The strange thing is that when a culture is intact, most of it remains invisible. You do not notice the lines on the map when you are walking them every day. You do not feel yourself being placed. You simply find that you are in place. You know how to enter a room, how to leave one, how to speak to someone older, and how to speak to someone grieving. You know when to say nothing. You know what tone to use, and what silence means when used by someone else. These are not matters of style. They are matters of structure. They orient you. People often confuse culture with belief, but belief can be spoken aloud and then contradicted. Culture lives deeper. It is not the set of things you say. It is the world you are standing in when you say them. It teaches not through instruction, but through rhythm and repetition. You see how your father stands at a funeral. You hear how your mother answers the door. And you learn, without needing to ask, what each of these things means. No one tells you that you are being placed, but you are. And placement is what culture once provided. It told you not only who you were, but where you were in relation to others, where you were in relation to time, in relation to duty, in relation to God. This is not a metaphor. It is a kind of geography. You moved within a landscape of meaning. There were seasons, thresholds, elevations, and boundaries. Childhood was not simply a phase. It was a territory. So was marriage. So was mourning. And when you crossed from one to another, the culture marked it with ceremony. You were not permitted to drift. It is difficult to explain this kind of world to someone who has never lived in one. For us, meaning comes only after we have made a decision. For them, meaning arrived first. It was in the air, in the way people walked, in the way meals were served, in what could and could not be said in public. The moral weight of life came not from laws, but from atmosphere. And this atmosphere did not need to explain itself. It was not justified. It was simply present. To violate it was not necessarily a crime, but it left one feeling stained, unclean, out of joint. The shame was not because you had broken a rule. It was because you had stepped out of place. It is this sense of placement that we have largely lost, and without it, people no longer know how to move. They hesitate. They overthink. They apologize for things no one asked them to apologize for, and grow proud over things that no one else notices. They live without a sense of the terrain. Every conversation is a guess. Every interaction is a risk. They are not disobedient. They are disoriented. This is not because culture has disappeared, but because it no longer holds together. There are still customs. There are still rules. There are still social expectations. But they do not cohere. The signals contradict. What is right in one space is wrong in another. The map no longer leads anywhere. The old culture placed you in time. The modern one displaces you in preference. You are told to find your identity. But identity is not a possession. It is a location. It is the place where what you are matches what you do. It cannot be found by looking inward. It can only be found by being received into something larger than yourself. And this is what a functioning culture once provided. It made room for you. We are told now that placement is oppressive, that direction is limiting, that boundaries are walls. And so the map has been erased in the name of freedom. But without it, we do not gain more room. We lose our sense of where we are. And then we begin to float. What comes next is not liberation. It is the slow panic of a person walking through a world where nothing is where it belongs, and no one is sure how to speak. Because speech, too, once belonged to a place. It was not only about conveying thoughts. It was about recognizing when, where, and to whom a thing should be said. Language did not simply communicate ideas. It oriented the speaker within a moral and social terrain. There were tones that opened doors, and tones that closed them. There were ways of asking for something that preserved dignity, and ways that exposed desperation. There was a right way to speak to an elder, a child, a guest, a stranger. You could say something perfectly true and still be wrong, because you had said it in the wrong way. This sense has faded. Speech has become flattened. It is judged now only by its content, or more often by its correctness. But the deeper question, where does this speech place me, has been forgotten. In its absence, people do not grow freer with their words. They grow more afraid. They speak cautiously because the landmarks are gone. They speak less because they are unsure what is permitted. And when they do speak, they often feel that they have said something wrong, though they cannot say why. It was not always so. In a coherent culture, language lives inside a structure. It rests on a bed of assumptions, most of them unspoken. These assumptions do not need to be taught. They are carried in the rhythm of speech itself. A well-placed silence could speak more than an argument. A certain turn of phrase could signal loyalty, humility, or resistance. The grammar was alive with memory. You could tell, in such a culture, what a word meant by the way it was used. Not only its definition, but its force. It had weight. It had a place. It had a time. There were words that belonged to the meal table, and words that belonged to prayer. There were words you could say to a neighbor, and others you reserved for the sick or the dying. Even the way you spoke of love changed, depending on whether it was spoken upward, downward, or across. This ordering of language was not artificial. It arose from the same place as ritual, song, and ceremony. It was a way of honoring the structure of things. You did not speak to a king as you spoke to a friend, not because the king was necessarily better, but because the office itself carried gravity. You lowered your voice in church, not because the ceiling demanded it, but because your soul did. The voice followed the place. Now, language is everywhere, and it is nowhere. It is streamed, clipped, typed, forwarded, misheard, and repurposed. It travels faster than reflection and lands without context. The same sentence is read by 1,000 people, each with their own frame of judgment, their own private terrain. And so words that once meant safety now feel suspicious. Jokes are read as slights. Confessions are interpreted as tactics. Every utterance floats free of its grounding. We are told to speak our truth. But if no one shares the world in which that truth makes sense, it cannot be heard. It can only be performed. And performance, no matter how sincere, is not the same as understanding. It may move others, it may move you, but it does not place you. And so we remain suspended, eloquent, expressive, and lost. It may seem strange for someone on the political right to admit it, but the progressives were correct to politicize language, not because they were right, but because they were observant. They understood, perhaps better than anyone else, that language is never neutral. Every word is a placement. To name something is to separate it, to lift it from the field of the unsaid and fix it within a frame. That frame may clarify, but it also confines. It divides. And this must be understood as a kind of violence, not the theatrical sort that draws blood, but the subtler kind that draws boundaries. A name is a boundary, and boundaries, even when drawn in ink, are drawn at a cost. This is as true in speech as it is in cartography. When a mapmaker draws a new border, people are moved, some literally, others politically, others spiritually. A family once united by shared ground finds itself on two sides of a fence. A hill that once belonged to everyone now belongs to someone, and no longer to someone else. The map looks clean, but the life it overlays has been cut. To name a thing is to make a claim, and every claim has consequences. A word, once spoken, does not float free. It places what it describes into a system. It changes what it is. It changes who may touch it, speak of it, possess it. Sometimes this is necessary, but it is never without cost. The act of naming reshapes the world, and it reshapes the speaker. We often forget this. We treat language as if it were a transparent tool. We assume that creating new words is a sign of progress, that to rename something is to refine it. But a new word is never just a refinement. It is a redrawing. It replaces one set of associations with another, and in doing so, it isolates the thing from its former meanings. It detaches the self from what it once knew. Think of the many names we have given to the same human roles. What was once called a housewife becomes a domestic manager. A cripple becomes differently abled. A tribe becomes an ethnic group, then a nation. Each change aims to improve. And perhaps it does. But none are painless. Each new term claims to clarify, but it also displaces. It overwrites memory. It imposes a new grammar of feeling. Those who once knew who they were must now learn how to speak again. And the speaker too is changed. For to use a new word with sincerity, one must adjust the self to match the system the word belongs to. One cannot simply switch labels and remain untouched. Language is part of a whole. When we adopt a word, we adopt the worldview it presumes. If that worldview does not belong to us, if it is borrowed, forced, or fashionable, then the cost is internal. We speak in a borrowed grammar. We perform our own estrangement. This is why new words are often resisted, not because they are wrong, but because they are disruptive. They draw new lines across familiar ground. They tell us that the place we thought we were standing is no longer valid, or never was. And this creates pain, a kind of psychic expropriation. What was once mine, intuitively, naturally, is now up for revision. It is no surprise that people only accept these changes when they sense some gain. A new word is welcomed when it grants protection or dignity or power. And even then, the acceptance is often uneasy. Beneath the surface, something has been lost. A familiarity has been broken. A silence has been filled with bureaucracy. The world becomes more legible but less felt. To name, then, is not to discover. It is to carve. It is to fix what was once fluid. It is to enforce a boundary where there was once participation. This does not mean we should never name, but it does mean we should never do so lightly. There is a violence in naming, a quiet one, but real. It cuts the world into parts. It allows it to be managed, categorized, discussed, but what it gains in clarity, it often loses in coherence. The world becomes more visible, and somehow less whole. This too was glimpsed in the work of W.V.O. Quine, who reminded us that no belief stands alone. Each idea we hold is connected, however faintly, to a broader web of belief. When one part is disturbed, others ripple. Meaning is not a collection of facts stacked neatly beside one another. It is a woven structure, fragile, flexible, and deeply entangled. To change a word, then, is not simply to replace one sign with another. It is to tug on the fabric of understanding. The act of renaming a thing alters not just how we describe it, but how we relate to everything surrounding it. One shift in language can unsettle an entire pattern of thought. What we once believed instinctively now appears uncertain. What we took for granted begins to require proof, and the web begins to tremble. This is why the introduction of new terms, especially those charged with moral or social weight, often creates unease. People are not resisting the new word itself. They are resisting the demand it places on the rest of their thinking. The new term carries with it a set of hidden commitments. It calls not only for repetition, but for reorientation. The change may seem small, a single term added or removed, but the consequences are not. Meaning, like belief, is holistic. No word arrives without consequence. We pretend that language can be managed like a library. Add a new volume, remove an outdated one, update a few definitions. But the mind is not a library. It is a living structure. It changes as a whole, and sometimes it breaks. A new word may clarify a policy, but it may also unsettle a memory, or cast doubt on something a person once thought was good. When words are changed carelessly or imposed too rapidly, the web does not adapt. It tears. A new word, introduced to tidy up a social discomfort or make space for a novel identity, does not land in a vacuum. It lands inside a living structure. That structure includes old associations, inherited categories, and unconscious judgments. One cannot simply insert a new term and expect everything around it to stay still. The meaning of a word depends on the world behind it. And when one part of that world is rewritten while the rest is not, the coherence that once bound it together begins to loosen. People still use the same words, but they do not mean the same things by them. The sense of a shared world starts to slip. At first, the changes are hard to detect. A conversation feels oddly strained. A familiar joke draws a blank stare. A sentence that once connected now produces distance, or worse, suspicion. The same phrase comes to mean different things depending on who says it, where, and to whom. This is not the noise of disagreement. It is the subtle disorientation that comes when people are no longer standing on the same ground. They are speaking across separate maps. And though the grammar remains, the geography does not. The listener and the speaker are no longer in the same place. Inside each of these maps, things still make sense. Words have weight. Gestures carry meaning. A person knows how to act and how to be seen. But these internal coherences are not shared. They are enclosed. What is polite in one community is evasive in another. What is loyal in one circle is betrayal in the next. Even silence means different things. And so people drift further apart, not because they want to, but because they no longer recognize the shape of each other's meaning. And with this estrangement comes caution. Speech becomes strategic. People do not speak freely. They weigh every word. They preface, they hedge, they soften. They use language not to connect, but to defend. The purpose of speech becomes less about saying what one means and more about avoiding what one might be punished for meaning. Conversations that once flowed now stall. Words are chosen less for truth and more for safety. It is not that people have grown dishonest. It is that they no longer know where speech might place them. In place of the natural ease that once accompanied shared speech, something colder begins to form. Each group, sensing its distance from others, starts to insulate itself. It develops phrases that act like passwords, shorthand cues that signal membership, fluency, allegiance. These are not spoken for clarity. They are spoken to confirm orientation. Inside these circles, language becomes liturgical. A single phrase can mark someone as belonging or as suspect. A misused word does not merely confuse, it offends. An omitted word, even in sincerity, can carry the weight of a betrayal. These ritual forms of language are not arbitrary. They emerge when trust is thin. When people are no longer sure that the person listening shares their moral terrain, they do not speak more plainly. They speak more carefully. They develop codes, acronyms, mantras, stock phrases, and formal disclaimers become substitutes for mutual understanding. But these phrases, though stabilizing within, become opaque without. They clarify one world and obscure all the others. And as each subculture doubles down on its internal grammar, the possibility of cross-cultural understanding grows smaller. Everyone is speaking, but fewer are being heard. When a culture can no longer agree on what words mean, it stops being a culture. It becomes an environment filled with floating signs, cautious expressions, and procedural rules. The old structure, where meaning arose from memory and habit, is replaced by formal management. What used to be assumed must now be declared. What used to be felt must now be certified. The collapse of mythic coherence does not lead to liberation. It leads to administration, and so people learn to navigate their world not with understanding, but with compliance. They stop asking, "Is this good?" and begin asking, "Is this allowed?" They stop listening for resonance and start watching for risk. They do not look for truth. They look for permission. The shared story has dissolved. All that remains is the script. And beneath all of it, beneath the caution, the passwords, the hesitations, there is anxiety. Not the sharp panic of danger, but the low hum of dislocation. A restlessness that cannot be explained because it is not attached to any one thing. It is the unease of walking through a world that no longer reflects you. Not because it has rejected you, but because it no longer remembers where you belong. This kind of anxiety does not flare. It accumulates. It grows in the space between speech and meaning, between gesture and recognition, between the thought you had and the moment. You decide not to say it. It grows in the moments you second-guess yourself, not because you are unsure of your intention, but because you are unsure how it will land. You feel watched, though no one is watching. You feel judged, though no one has spoken. In such a world, even friendship becomes cautious. Even love must be negotiated. You are no longer sure what another person hears when you speak. You are no longer sure how to read their silence. And so the smallest interactions begin to take on weight. A delayed reply, a raised eyebrow, a change in tone. You begin to read everything as signal, and every signal as potentially dangerous. The self in such a world is not silenced. It is suspended. It speaks, but floats. It tries to place itself, but the lines are gone. And so it begins to perform, not out of vanity, but out of fear. It adopts the phrases that sound safe, the ideas that travel well, the tones that do not offend. But all the while, it is wondering where the edge is, what it can still say without being misunderstood, what it can still feel without being suspect. This is not the fear of being wrong. It is the fear of being misplaced. A sense that there is no longer any stable ground from which to be yourself, or even to know quite what that means. And over time, the unease hardens, not into rebellion, but into fatigue. It is tiring to be cautious all the time. It is tiring to monitor your language, your tone, your metaphors, your pauses. It is tiring to live without coordinates. People long for the return of something they cannot name. Not certainty, not control, but coherence, a sense that the world means something again, and that they are located somewhere inside of it.